Hey everyone, welcome to Story Premise. The following is Chapter 2 of my story, Radiance and Corruption. If you haven't listened to Chapter 1, you don't necessarily need to in order to understand what is going on, but I do encourage you to take a look at Chapter 1 when you are finished here. The Conspiracy at Tyfir Manor. The afternoon sun basked in the blue-tinted sky. The day's heat sapped the little moisture that was left in the ground, leaving the dusty clay crossroads cracked and dry. A pair of wagon wheels rolled across the clay, crushing and smoothing some of the cracks in the road. It was an ornate wagon, gilded with fine silver rimming. "Traffic is especially heavy today," thought Assad. "If the rumors are true, this will be quite the occasion." Assad wore a ragged black tunic with a sleeveless dark brown jerkin over the top. His dark trousers were frayed at the ends, and the soles of his boots had lost much of their cushion. Beneath his hood, Assad's brown eyes surveyed the road from his hiding spot among the trees. The time was rapidly approaching for him to meet his employer, a mysterious benefactor. As he continued watching the passing chariots, Assad noticed something near one luxurious wagon in particular. Below the wagon was a blur of motion, which was swiftly followed by the parting of some field grain. The wheat was still once more. "Maybe a rabbit crossed below the wagon. Or maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me," mused Assad. After a few more minutes, a wiry figure could be seen wandering up the trail. He was tall, thin, and wore dark rags. He eventually stopped off to the side of the crossroads. As he turned, Assad recognized the youthful face of a teenager. What was that boy's name again? Assad's brow furrowed in thought. It'll come to me. Assad hardly forgot names. He made many a friend here and there, and always remembered much about them. The teenager glanced around as he stood at the intersection. He began pacing and whistled a bouncy tune. Assad continued waiting in the trees, intrigued at this turn of events. Assad heard the next newcomer before he saw him. The dull clinking of rusty metal rang in the air as an armor-bound knight walked down the road. The man marched along the path, head held high, an obvious limp in his step. Upon seeing the teenager off to the side of the road, the knight stopped in the center of the road, looking between the teenager and the road ahead. Eventually the knight stomped towards the youth. "Someone's on the warpath," Assad chuckled. Taking off his helmet, the knight was revealed to be a late middle-aged man with wispy gray hair. The man scratched his head and proceeded to shout at the youth. From his position, Assad could not hear the youth's responses well. "What is the meaning of this?" the cantankerous man demanded. He held a piece of parchment right in the boy's face. The youth stepped back and gestured awkwardly, his gangly arms moving erratically as he seemingly tried to explain something. "What do you mean you don't know? You're here, right where you told me to meet you." Assad crept closer. He was curious what the youth had to say. "Couldn't come to meet you himself, so I was told to come meet you here," the boy said. "I should like to talk to this boss of yours. This is an outrage, extortion, a scam!" the older man yelled. He continued to complain ragefully. The youth nervously glanced around and tried calming the older man. Assad was immensely enjoying the spectacle. However, if this was part of the job, Assad needed to clear things up. Brushing himself off, Assad stepped into the open fields and made his way towards the crossroads. As Assad approached, he caught the youth's eyes. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Assad! Hey, it's me! You know, Gilgo!" Gilgo's eyes looked pleadingly, relieved that someone else was here to interrupt the knight's tirade. Assad slowed his step, gently continuing forward. The middle-aged man spun around, eyes full of fire and rage. He pointed a shaking finger towards Assad. "You then! You must be the extortionist!" "Calm yourself, my rusty friend," Assad started. The knight's armor was dented and caked with rust. "I myself was invited here too." "I didn't know you took the job," Gilgo said, almost in reverence. Well, that depends on what the job is, Assad said, looking meaningfully at Gilgo. I should like to know as well, said a smooth voice behind Assad. Assad whirled around. A rustling came from the grain, as a figure emerged from the fringes of the field. He sported a dark purple hat, with an eagle's feather sprouting from the side. His long-sleeved shirt matched his hat, purple and indigo stripes adorning it. His boots laced up high, up to his thighs. His dark striped pants were barely visible between the boots and the dark blue vest that covered his shirt and torso. Slung across the figure's back was a strange-looking stringed instrument that appeared to be a mix between a harp and a guitar. Assad did not like being snuck up on. He stepped to the side so as to keep both Gilgo and the strange minstrel in sight. Yes, the job! Gilgo was trying unsuccessfully to feign confidence. Gilgo had always been somewhat of a tag-along on these sort of jobs. This was likely his first time as the overseer of such a mission. Gilgo continued, seeming to be reciting something from memory. As the beneficiaries, some of you receive payment in advance for this job with promise of a greater payment. I represent the benefactor, our boss, in the fulfillment of this mission. Something was stolen from the benefactor, and he would like it returned to him. The object in question is held within the home of Duke Thibaudius Tyfir. Our task is to make our way into his home and take the object back. What is this object? Assad interjected. Gilgo pulled out a piece of parchment and showed it to the others. On the parchment was a detailed painting of a drawstring leather bag with 2 blue beads on the ends of the strings. The benefactor gave strict instructions for us to return the bag to him without looking at the contents. And who is this mysterious benefactor? The minstrel asked, eyebrow raised. I don't know, Gilgo admitted. I'm just a messenger to the messenger. I don't know exactly how far the train of messengers goes. But he's offered a hefty price for the mission, if we are to complete it.
Thievery? And why would I help in such a despicable endeavor? The cantankerous knight protested.
And what is your name, my good sir? Assad addressed the knight politely.
Ronald Barthol. Sir Ronald Barthol, to the lowly such as you, the knight said proudly.
Of course, my lord. I should have recognized that I was in the presence of such noble blood, Assad said, bowing his head. A sly grin split its way through Assad's lips as he did so.
At least someone here knows to pay respect to their betters,
the knight said, with an air of satisfied justice.
Now I ask again, why would I aid thieves such as you?
Ronald directed his attention back to Gilgo, who began to stutter. My lord, Assad began again, I've heard of this Duke Tyfir. He bears resentment towards the king, and our cause is just. We are reclaiming stolen property. I'm sure you would agree, my lord, that justice should be served.
You make an excellent point, Sir Ronald agreed. You would make a suitable page, Salad.
Oh, such a thing would be a great honor, Assad said, a hint of amusement in his tone.
It is decided then. My page and my servant will accompany me to this duke's manor, and I will sort this thing out, Ronald stated with conviction.
No, the duke isn't supposed to know about any of this, Gilgo protested. And how do you suppose to get in to meet him?
That young lad is simple,
Ronald said, as if it were obvious.
The duke invited me as a guest to his party tonight.
Rashak. This would be easy. The old man had a way into the party. And better yet, he had a pass for 2 guests to get in as well. This Ronald was also quite loud and obnoxious. He would provide a great distraction to allow Rashak to find this leather bag and claim the job reward. But for now, he'd have to play along as Ronald's servant. The 4 marched down the road. The sun kissed the horizon, casting long shadows through the forests to the west. A speck in the distance grew larger with each step, as it revealed itself to be a magnificent mansion. The road was cobbled now. Occasional chariots passed, hurrying toward the mansion. Eventually, the group reached an ornate iron gate. Just past the gate and to the west of the road was a stable with dozens of carriages and chariots parked nearby.
"At ease, men,"
Ronald said to two unmoving guards stationed at the gate. The road eventually met with marbled steps rising to a set of polished oak doors. Ronald led the way up the steps, huffing with exertion, Assad, Rashak, and Gilgo trailing behind. Ronald made to push the doors open.
"Halt!"
A pair of halberds crossed in front of Ronald. Two soldiers were standing guard beside the fine oak doors.
"No entry without an invitation."
"I beg your pardon?" Assad stepped forward. "Do you not recognize the regal knight who stands before you? In front of your eyes stands Sir Ronald of the Bardethal House." The guards exchanged glances of confusion. Sir Ronald spoke up.
"Indeed, my humble page speaks the truth. I should have words with your master about the poor reception we've had tonight. Do you even understand the meaning of the word hospitality?"
"We can't let you in without an invitation," one of the guards insisted. Sir Ronald grumbled and fumbled in his pack, pulling out a crumpled and stained piece of parchment with a fine wax seal. He handed it to the guard. The guard's eyes quickly scanned the piece of parchment. His brow furrowed as he said, "The invitation only permits you to bring 2 additional guests. There are 3 with you." Assad, Ronald, and Rashak all turned and fixed their eyes on Gilgo, who was tagging along in the back.
"Young Gilgo here was just about to leave, weren't you?"
Ronald said, eyebrow raised. Twitching nervously, Gilgo stuttered. Yeah, you know, horses to tend to and such." He turned around and trotted away to loiter near the stables. The guards nodded and opened the double doors into the mansion. Bright light from a massive great hall enveloped Rashak, Assad, and Ronald as they entered. Lining the outside of the entire hall were beautiful candles on ornate candlesticks. There was an impressive balcony, with 2 grand staircases sweeping up to meet it. Vibrant music struck the trio's ears, and a jovial atmosphere enveloped them. People in all sorts of attire were laughing, eating, and socializing. Some of the people wore fancy ball gowns and fine tailcoats. A couple of people stuck out to Rashak. An elegant-looking tall man, with the long blonde hair, was walking between groups of people, greeting them and shaking hands with them. A brawny black man in shining plate armor was casually speaking with a fat man, whose fancy attire seemed a little too small for him. A skinny, unkempt man was inspecting the walls of the room, tapping them and putting his ear to them. Hurrying about the vast hall were servants and maids. They loaded a banquet table with food and served guests wine and other beverages on silver platters. The doors to a kitchen were flapping open and closed as servants went to and from the kitchen. Eventually Rashak's eyes focused on one end of the room, from whence the music was coming. An orchestra was playing a variety of strings and woodwind instruments. Rashak unslung his lyre from his back and quickly began to tune it. As he did so, he could see Ronald and Assad making their way to the banquet table. Rashak refocused on his instrument. Perfect. The lyre was tuned. Rashak made his way toward the orchestra's conductor. The song ended, and Rashak tapped the conductor on the shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," Rashak began, "but I happen to be a traveling bard, and I was hoping to be of some service at this gathering." "Intriguing," the conductor said. "We have no songs with the lyre, but you can perform a solo. We'll let you have the spotlight." Rashak was prepared for this. He strummed a simple chord to get the crowd's attention. The room began to go silent, as heads swiveled in his direction. He strummed the same chord, gave a brief pause, then opened his mouth.
Oh, Roderick the Rash was a fool of a man. He made a wrong bet, wound up in a far land. He saw a stone tower off of the dirt road, where rumors told of a fair maiden's abode. But a dragon was said to be guarding the way. With sword in his hand, Roderick would save the day. Until he heard a fair voice call, "Help me!" From the mouth of a cave sounded a lady. But he did not know that this dragon was skilled with voice mimics. Many brave knights had been killed. Oh, last he would be the winner, but his bet would not last, he would soon be dinner. And into the cave foolish Roderick did follow, till the opening slammed shut and the dragon did swallow. So ye be brave, be ye also real wise, lest ye fall prey to a dragon in disguise.
The room broke into applause, mirth, and merriment. Without skipping a beat, the conductor started the orchestra into a merry tune. Many of the guests began to dance.
Even I am surprised by the amusement the riffraff can bring,
Ronald chortled, loud enough to be heard above the crowd. Rashak slung his clylyre back onto his back. A performance always seemed to help fill him full of energy. Such was a great distraction for the uncertain life of a traveling bard. At this moment, the long-haired blonde man approached Rashak.
I've seen many a fine performance in my day, but few so entertaining as that. What is your name, dear minstrel?
Rashak, he replied. And who are you?
My name is Galander Effitancy, the man said with a gleaming smile. I invited you all here today for Duke Tyfir's announcement.
What is it? Rashak asked.
I'm afraid that we both have yet to see, Galander replied, a hint of mystery in his voice. Anyways, Galander turned his attention back to Rashak, I'd best see what is taking the Duke so long. It was a pleasure for me to meet such a talented musician.
With a bow, Galander walked away. Assad. Assad enjoyed Rashak's song immensely. In all of his travels, Assad had never heard this particular song. Assad wondered if he and his companions had somehow come to this party without realizing they were walking into a monster's jaws. He shook the thought away. Ronald wandered off to talk to a middle-aged maid. It seemed like he knew her name. Assad looked around the room, wondering what to do. His eyes stopped when he saw a beautiful woman with an olive complexion, wearing a white dress. She looked somewhat familiar, but Assad could not place where he had seen her. Assad approached her.
And what is your name, milady?
She turned towards him, a pleasant smile on her face. My name is Ishta, Lady Ishta, and who might you be?
My name is Assad. I am from the city of Myriad Mirage, in the southern desert,
Assad responded. That is where I am from, Lady Ishta said excitedly. Assad had guessed as much. Where in the city are you from?
I'm from one of the wealthy estates there,
Assad lied. Lady Ishta didn't seem as impressed as Assad hoped.
But I've been traveling for a while.
Interesting. And what brings you here tonight? Lady Ishta asked.
Traveling with my friend Ronald.
Assad gestured toward the feast table, where Ronald was holding a turkey drumstick, mouth full, while simultaneously trying to gulp down a chalice.
He was really excited to get his hands on the food here.
Assad winked. Lady Ishta laughed. He does seem to be enjoying himself.
Now may I ask, why are you here tonight?
Assad said. Lady Ishta frowned. To be honest, just to be polite. I suppose some of the other guests are here out of fear, if not to be polite as well. I don't have a great opinion of our host, Duke Tyfir. I know too much about him and how he treats his subordinates.
What do you mean?
Assad asked, curious. Look at them. They're all afraid. Indeed, as Assad looked, he saw that many of the servants were jittery, frequently glancing at the guards and at a door on the second floor, just off the balcony. If they don't perform their duties well, Tyfir has taskmasters punish them by physical force. It's terrible, Lady Ishta explained. She went on to talk about other cruelties that the servants had to experience, but Assad was losing focus. The hall was starting to go silent. The blonde-haired man was standing at the balcony near the center of the room. He cleared his throat, and the room began to hush.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed the festivities and morsels prepared tonight by Duke Tyfir and his wonderful staff.
Galander paused, and some light clapping ensued.
If you have not yet tried the roasted delectifruit,
I would suggest you do so later this evening. That one is my favorite. Now on to more intriguing business. I, Galander Ephetansi, would like to introduce you to our illustrious host, Duke Thibarius Tyfir. There was a stiff silence. Galander continued. He has a few words he would like to share with you here, then the festivities will continue. The door in the center of the second story opened, and a man stepped onto the balcony. His hair was black, with a slight widow's peak. He had a professional-looking goatee. His presence was imposing. His shoulders were broad with muscle, and he held his head high. On either side of him were two soldiers wearing black armor, complete with helmets hiding their eyes. The silence continued, all eyes focused on the man on the balcony. He surveyed the people below him. Assad looked around and was amazed to find that most of the people looked at the Duke with disdain, fear, and even hatred. Rashak. The Duke opened his mouth and spoke. A powerful, deep voice seemed to reverberate off the walls of the room. Long has our country stood for the principles of the collective prosperity. Upon the founding of our nation, Havian was merely a continent for the porting of ships. During times of strife between the nations, warships and armies camped out here. After the events of the Great War, our ancestors chose to make this land their home, leaving behind the traditions of their birthplaces and the petty feuds of their fathers. They began to cultivate this land for future generations. My great-grandfather, Teronius Tyfir, was among the first to settle here. He sweat, bled, and shed tears over his people. Against all odds, they escaped bloodshed and began to establish peace here. The years passed, and the people spread, vowing to forget some of the secrets of old. But the line of Tyfir never forgot. This forbidden knowledge was knowledge of a power that facilitated wars and made continents to move. It could heal the sick or sunder the heart. With it, one could control their enemies, or even command the skies. Eventually, the people of all Havian were united under the King of Chaldeel. Generations passed. Peace was abundant across the whole land. My father, Thestalio, oversaw the affairs of this part of Havian. He, as I am, was second only to the king. During his days, a great sickness spread across the land. Not just people, but livestock and wildlife were destroyed in its wake. This was a time of great stress for my father, who himself fell ill. Rumors came to him of a wayfarer, who held the key to curing this disease. He held miraculous power. Thestalio sent his emissaries to find this wayfarer, but it was too late. The wanderer was arrested and put to death by the king's men in secret. I was a young boy at this time, but I witnessed the death of my own father to the wretched plague. As he lay in agony, he asked me to free this people, to free them from ignorance, to free them from calamity, and to free them from the wretched king, by whatever means necessary. It is no secret that I bear no great love towards any of you. It may seem coincidental that I gathered each of my most despised adversaries here, but it is no coincidence. I offer you, my enemies and rivals, this. Realign yourselves to me. Help me bring about this new age of prosperity. Change your ways, serve me, and I will reward you greatly. Together we will not only protect our people from the calamities within, but also from the powers without. What say ye?
You dare betray the king? Yelled Ronald. For that you will die!
The black man in plate armor stepped forward and said, What you preach is treason against King Beldar. I, King's General Tabert, command you to stand down. Tyfir chuckled. I'll give you all one more chance to join me. As he said this, Tyfir stepped off the balcony, but he did not fall. He was stepping onto thin air, as if walking upon a solid surface. People gasped as he did so. Duke Tyfir now stood in the air, above the center of the room. Rashak looked towards the doors. Every entrance and exit he could see was blocked by guards. The servants had disappeared. Someone stumbled into the middle of the room. It was the fat man with the tight clothing.
I submit, my lord,
he said, eyes low in shame. A pair of guards escorted him out of a back door.
Anyone else?
Tyfir said, eyebrow raised.
Then you have all chosen death.
He raised his arms, and a red aura enveloped his hands. The candles around the room burned high and bright. There were screams and yelling from the people gathered. The temperature in the room momentarily rose. It took Rashak a moment before he realized what was happening. His instinct told him to hit the deck, so he did so. He dropped to the ground not a moment too late. Flame erupted from the candles near the walls and blasted into the partygoers. A few moments later, the flames shrunk back to their candlesticks. Few people remained alive. Among the living were Rashak, Assad, Ronald, the King's General Tabard, Lady Ishta, and a few other screaming guests. There were about 8 guards in the room, defending the doors. Tabard dashed towards one of the guards like a blur. He pulled a greatsword out of a sheath, and his sword rang against the blade of the guards. Ronald did likewise, wielding an old arming sword and buckler. Assad attempted to help Lady Ishta up, who instead drew a dagger from her leg and threw it at the nearest guard. He dropped to the ground. A guard ran straight for Rashak, brandishing a sword. Rashak dodged and pulled out a dagger. Perks of being a traveling merchant. You never go anywhere unprepared. A couple of guards with crossbows were firing on any stragglers who survived the fire. Their shots were meeting their marks. Tyfir continued floating in the middle of the room. He pointed a confident finger at one of the party stragglers. A blue flash erupted from his finger as a small shard of ice launched across the room to strike the unfortunate partygoer. Rashak was locked in combat with the guard. His enemy had the advantage of reach with his sword, but Rashak was nimbler. After taking some minor cuts, he dodged and ducked and got close enough to slash in the vulnerable points of the man's armor. The guard fell painfully to the ground. "Please," he said. Rashak obliged him. Killing him wasn't worth his time. Rashak turned his attention to the room at large. Lady Ishta had picked up a crossbow from a fallen guard and was now firing it at Tyfir. Tyfir turned his attention to the lady. He pointed a finger once again. A flash of blue ensued, only this time it did not strike its mark. Lady Ishta dodged out of the way. But at this moment, Rashak noticed something. The carpet. The carpet was glowing. In the center of the room was a rug. The rug had almost ancient-looking symbols on it. One of the symbols was glowing, and at the moment Tyfir launched the ice projectile, another symbol flashed. Rashak had an idea. Suddenly there was a crash of glass and a loud boom. A guard at the front of the room was stepping back from some flames. Somehow, the unkempt man with black hair had gone unnoticed. He was lighting what appeared to be a fuse connected to a bottle of alcohol. He threw another Molotov cocktail, but this one drastically missed its target and set one of the house walls on fire. King's General Tabard finished his opponent quickly. Ronald rapidly dispatched his as well. Tabard ran towards the back door. "It's blocked from the outside!" he shouted. Assad defeated one of the crossbowmen. He ran towards the stairs, but stopped immediately when the 2 soldiers in black armor with halberds reached the bottom steps of both staircases. Assad dove past the closest guard and scrambled up the staircase as a large steel halberd slammed right behind him. The carpet glowed once more. This time a different symbol glowed bright red. Rashak looked up to see the banquet table was now ablaze. Lady Ishta ducked out of the way as Tyfir cast another ball of fire at her. Rashak immediately jabbed his knife into the carpet where the red sign was. He looked up to see that a new fireball was in Tyfir's hand. Rashak tore the rug, and the fireball in Tyfir's hand dimmed and shrunk. Tyfir cursed and looked down. He stretched out his hand and a shard of ice shot out of his palm, straight at Rashak. Rashak had no time to dodge. The icicle pierced into his shoulder and sent a wave of shock through his arm. Biting his lip, Rashak crawled towards the symbol that had recently just flashed blue. Meanwhile, Assad had reached the top of the stairs. He took a deep breath and braced himself. He sprung forward and dove off the balcony, hands groping for Tyfir's ankle. But sadly, Assad's fingertips barely grazed Tyfir's boot, and Assad landed flat on the story below, the wind knocked out of him. Another Molotov cocktail splashed on the ground, this time just missing Duke Tyfir, but landing close to the rug. Flames started to dance across the floor, heading towards Rashak, Assad, and the rug. Ronald and Tabert were in fierce combat with the two Dark Knights. The Knights kept Tabert and Ronald at a distance, using their halberds effectively. Ronald slammed his shield into a halberd, giving himself an opening to strike.
Die, traitors!
Ronald screamed. His sword repeatedly slammed into the knight's armor, but occasionally a strike would hit flesh. Tabert, however, was not having as much luck. He was completely on the defensive and bleeding from his leg. Lady Ishta was in a bind. A guard was converging on her, and Tyfir was simultaneously firing ice spikes at her. It was only a matter of time for her. Assad threw a dagger at Tyfir. His dagger hit its target, right at Tyfir's chest. The dagger, however, did not penetrate far enough to kill Tyfir. Tyfir diverted his attention to Assad, and slowly started floating toward the ground. Tyfir's hand was glowing blue, outstretched to reach Assad. Sir Ronald had finished off his dark-armored guard, and ran to help Tabert with his. Ronald knocked the dark-armored soldier off his feet, and together he and Tabert finished him off. Smoke was billowing around in the room. Rashak began to cough. They needed to finish this soon. Rashak grabbed the rug and started to drag it into the blaze that was on the floor. Tyfir's eyes widened in disbelief. Abandoning his goal of reaching Assad, Tyfir zoomed up towards the ceiling, where a glass dome loomed, revealing the night sky. Rashak dove to the one symbol that had been constantly glowing, a white symbol. He plunged his knife into the rug. Tyfir wobbled in the air, but his trajectory sent him flying through the glass panes above the mansion. After a moment, heavy footfalls were heard on the roof. Rashak looked around the room. Somehow, the 6 of them had dispatched all the guards and sent Tyfir running. Now there was a bigger problem: getting out of here. "The front doors are locked too," Lady Ishta yelled.
"We still haven't found what we're looking for,"
Assad said to Rashak.
"Maybe there's a way out of one of the rooms up there."
Assad pointed towards the room that Tyfir originally came out of.
"It's worth a try,"
Rashak responded. Together he, Tabert, Assad, Lady Ishta, and Ronald ran up the stairs.
"Serves those traitors right,"
Ronald said, surveying the scene behind them. Rashak grabbed the door handle to Tyfir's room. The handle swung wide open, and together the 5 entered the room before them. Thanks for listening. This is part of a story that I am developing with my friends through a tabletop role-playing adventure. If you want to hear part 1, click on the link in the screen. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to hear more. Stay tuned for Chapter 3, where we will find out if Rashak, Ronald, Assad, and their friends make it out of the burning mansion alive.